She sat in the back row wearing old clothes, looking poor and forgotten. Nobody cared about the woman everyone ignored. Then the pilot collapsed at 11 kilometers high. Fighter jets called out a mysterious name over the radio. Suddenly the invisible passenger became their only hope for survival. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Commander Elena Ghost Martinez sat in the very last row of Delta Flight 2459, seat 47F, wearing clothes that made her invisible. A faded gray hoodie pulled up over her head, old blue jeans with paint stains, and worn sneakers that had seen better days. She carried a cheap plastic bag instead of luggage and kept her head down, reading a paperback romance novel she had bought at the airport for $3. To everyone around her, she looked like someone who couldn't afford a better seat. Maybe a single mother traveling to see family, or a college dropout going home after failing to make it in the big city. The flight attendants barely glanced at her when they walked past. Other passengers acted like she didn't exist. This was exactly what Elena wanted. After 15 years of being one of the most feared and respected pilots in the United States Navy, she had finally learned how to become nobody. Her long black hair was now dyed brown and hung loose around her face. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, nothing that would make anyone remember seeing her. "Excuse me," said the businessman in 47E, trying to get past her to use the bathroom. He didn't say please or thank you. He didn't even look at her face. She was just an obstacle in cheap clothes taking up space. Elena smiled quietly to herself. If only he knew that the woman he was treating like trash had shot down enemy fighters, landed on aircraft carriers in storms, and commanded squadrons of the most dangerous pilots in the world. But that was exactly the point. Nobody was supposed to know who she really was. 3 months ago, Elena had been given the most important mission of her career: disappear completely. Enemy agents had put a price on her head after her last operation, and the Navy needed her to vanish until the threat was over. So Commander Elena Ghost Martinez, one of the deadliest fighter pilots alive, had become a nobody traveling on cheap flights with fake identification. But sometimes, being hidden means you're in the right place when people need help the most. Captain Mark Stevens had been flying commercial planes for 22 years, but he had never felt anything like the pain that suddenly shot through his chest as Flight 2459 cruised peacefully at 11 kilometers above Nebraska. The Boeing 767 was carrying 234 passengers from Seattle to Miami, and everything had been normal until Captain Stevens felt like someone was squeezing his heart with giant hands. "Tom," he gasped to First Officer Tom Wilson, "something's wrong? Really wrong." First Officer Wilson immediately noticed that his captain's face had gone completely white and he was having trouble breathing. "What kind of wrong? What's happening?" "Chest pain. Bad chest pain. Can't breathe properly." Captain Stevens tried to stay calm, but Wilson could see panic in his eyes. Wilson took control of the airplane immediately. "Captain, I'm taking the aircraft. Just try to stay calm." But Captain Stevens wasn't staying calm. The pain was getting worse and he was starting to feel dizzy and sick. His hands were shaking and sweat was pouring down his face even though the cockpit was cool. "Tom," Stevens whispered, "I think I'm having a heart attack." Those words sent ice through Wilson's veins. He had trained for this situation, but it had never happened to him before. He was now the only pilot on an airplane carrying 234 people, and they were still 3 hours away from Miami. Wilson immediately called for medical help over the airplane's speaker system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical emergency in the cockpit. If there are any doctors aboard, please identify yourselves to the flight crew immediately." Dr. Sarah Kim, a heart doctor returning from a medical conference, rushed to the cockpit. After examining Captain Stevens, her face showed exactly what Wilson was afraid to hear. "He's having a major heart attack," she told Wilson quietly. "His heart rhythm is dangerous and his blood pressure is dropping fast. He needs to get to a hospital immediately or he could die." Wilson felt the weight of 234 lives pressing down on him. He was qualified to fly the 767, but he had never been the main pilot on such a large airplane. And now he had to land it by himself while his captain was dying beside him. In seat 47F, Elena heard the announcement about the medical emergency and felt her military training automatically kick in. She had been on enough flights to know that when pilots called for doctors, something serious was happening. But her orders were clear: stay hidden, don't get involved, don't let anyone discover who she really was. Elena tried to go back to her romance novel, but she couldn't concentrate. Her trained ear picked up subtle changes in the airplane's engine sounds and the way it was flying. Something was definitely wrong and it was getting worse. The passenger beside her, a nervous teenager named Jake, was starting to panic. "Do you think we're going to crash?" he whispered. "Probably not," Elena replied quietly, though she was beginning to have her own concerns. The airplane was flying differently now, small changes that most passengers wouldn't notice, but which told her that the crew was dealing with serious problems. 20 minutes later, the captain's voice came over the speaker again, but this time it was a different voice. Younger, more stressed, trying to sound calm but not quite succeeding. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Wilson. Captain Stevens is receiving medical attention, and I will be flying the aircraft for the remainder of our flight. We may experience some delays, but everything is under control." Elena immediately knew that everything was not under control. She had heard that same tone in young pilots' voices before, when they were trying to handle situations they weren't prepared for. Wilson was scared and he was trying not to show it. But Elena's orders were absolute. Stay hidden no matter what. Even if people died, even if the airplane crashed, she was not supposed to reveal her identity. Too many lives depended on her staying secret. At least, that's what she kept telling herself as the airplane continued to fly in ways that worried her more and more. First Officer Wilson was discovering that being the only pilot on a large commercial airplane was much harder than he had expected. Captain Stevens was unconscious now, and Dr. Kim was working to keep him alive, but Wilson was facing problems he had never dealt with before. The weather ahead was getting bad. Really bad. A line of dangerous thunderstorms was moving across their flight path, and Wilson would have to navigate around them or through them. Normally, Captain Stevens would help plan the route and make the tough decisions. But now Wilson was completely alone. "Miami Center, Delta 2459, Wilson radioed to air traffic control. "We're still dealing with a medical emergency, and I'm requesting vectors around the weather ahead. Delta 2459 Miami Center. We're showing a solid line of storms from your position to Miami. There's no easy way around them. You're going to have to fly through some weather." Wilson felt his heart sink. Flying through thunderstorms in a large airplane required experience and skill that he wasn't sure he had. Captain Stevens had always handled the weather decisions before. But the storms weren't Wilson's only problem. The airplane was also starting to show mechanical issues. Warning lights were beginning to appear on the instrument panel, nothing critical yet, but enough to make Wilson even more nervous than he already was. In the passenger cabin, people were starting to notice that something was wrong. The airplane was bouncing more than usual, and they could see lightning flashing outside the windows. Some passengers were getting scared, and flight attendants were having trouble keeping everyone calm. Elena watched it all from her seat in the back, fighting every instinct that told her to help. She knew exactly what was happening and she knew how to fix it. But helping would mean revealing who she was, and that could get a lot of people killed, just not the people on this airplane. When Flight 2459 entered the thunderstorm, Wilson immediately knew he was in trouble. The airplane was being thrown around like a toy and he was fighting just to keep it under control. Rain hammered against the windscreen so hard he could barely see, and lightning was flashing all around them. "Delta 2459, how are you handling the turbulence?" asked air traffic control. It's pretty rough up here," Wilson replied, trying to keep his voice steady while the airplane shook violently. But Wilson's biggest problem wasn't the turbulence, it was the ice. The airplane was flying through freezing rain, and ice was building up on the wings faster than the de-icing systems could handle it. Ice on airplane wings is deadly because it changes how the airplane flies and can cause it to fall out of the sky. "We're getting ice buildup," Wilson reported to air traffic control, requesting immediate clearance to a lower altitude. "Delta 2459, descend to flight level 200. Be advised there are other aircraft in the area." As Wilson tried to descend through the storm, the airplane hit an air pocket that dropped them suddenly by several hundred feet. Passengers screamed as they were thrown against their seatbelts, and the airplane shook so violently that Wilson was sure something was going to break. That's when the real emergency began. Warning alarms started going off in the cockpit. The airplane's engines were having trouble with the ice, and the electrical systems were being damaged by lightning strikes. Wilson was no longer just dealing with bad weather, he was dealing with an airplane that was starting to fall apart. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," Wilson transmitted. "Delta 2459 declaring emergency. We have multiple system failures and are having difficulty maintaining controlled flight." In seat 47F, Elena heard the mayday call and felt her blood run cold. She had heard enough emergency transmissions in her military career to know that Flight 2459 was in serious trouble. The airplane was no longer just experiencing bad weather, it was fighting for its life. Elena closed her eyes and tried to block out what was happening. Her orders were clear: stay hidden no matter what. The mission she was hiding from was too important, and too many lives depended on her remaining secret. But as the airplane continued to shake and drop, Elena heard something that changed everything: a little girl crying for her mother. 3 rows ahead of Elena sat 6-year-old Lucy Chin, traveling alone to see her grandmother in Miami. The turbulence had terrified her, and she was crying for her mother, who was thousands of miles away. Flight attendants were too busy dealing with the emergency to comfort her. Elena looked at Lucy's terrified face and made a decision that would end her hiding forever. She stood up. "Miss, please return to your seat," said flight attendant Jennifer Walsh as Elena moved toward the front of the airplane. "I need to speak to the pilot," Elena said quietly. "I'm sorry, but passengers aren't allowed in the cockpit during emergencies." Elena looked Jennifer directly in the eyes. "I'm not a passenger. I'm Commander Elena Martinez, United States Navy. And that pilot needs help right now." Jennifer stared at Elena in shock. The woman in the cheap hoodie and torn jeans had just claimed to be a military officer. But something in Elena's voice and the way she carried herself made Jennifer believe her. "Are you really Navy?" Jennifer asked. "Fighter pilot. 15 years experience. And if I don't get into that cockpit in the next 2 minutes, this airplane is going to crash." As Elena entered the cockpit of Flight 2459, she immediately assessed the situation with the trained eye of someone who had dealt with aircraft emergencies in much more dangerous conditions. First Officer Wilson was overwhelmed, Captain Stevens was unconscious, and the airplane was barely staying in the air. "First Officer Wilson," Elena said calmly, "I'm Commander Elena Martinez, United States Navy. I'm here to help." Wilson looked at Elena in amazement. "You're military? But you look like someone who's been hiding," Elena finished. "What's our status?" Wilson quickly explained the multiple emergencies they were facing. Severe weather, ice buildup, engine problems, electrical failures, and an unconscious captain. Any one of these problems would be serious. All of them together was a recipe for disaster. Elena looked at the instrument panel and immediately began processing information with the speed and accuracy that had made her legendary in Navy aviation. She had flown through worse storms, dealt with more serious mechanical failures, and landed on aircraft carriers in conditions that would terrify most pilots. "First Officer Wilson," Elena said, "I'm going to help you fly this airplane. You're still the pilot in command, but I'm going to guide you through some techniques that aren't taught in commercial aviation." "What kind of techniques?" Wilson asked. "Military survival techniques. Ways to fly broken airplanes through impossible weather." Elena's voice carried the calm authority of someone who had commanded squadrons of fighters and landed on aircraft carriers in storms. Wilson immediately felt his confidence return. He wasn't alone anymore. As Elena took the co-pilot seat and began helping Wilson stabilize the airplane, air traffic control was trying to figure out who had suddenly appeared in the cockpit of Flight 2459. "Delta 2459, we understand you have military assistance aboard. Can you identify the pilot providing assistance?" Elena hesitated. Revealing her call sign would completely blow her cover and end her mission. Enemy agents around the world would know exactly where she was. But 234 people were depending on her right now. "Air traffic control, this is Ghost," Elena transmitted, using her call sign for the first time in 3 months. The reaction was immediate and shocked. Ghost was a legendary call sign in military aviation. Every air traffic controller who worked near military bases knew that name. Ghost was the Navy pilot who had shot down more enemy aircraft than anyone in recent history. Ghost was the pilot who had landed damaged fighters on aircraft carriers when everyone said it was impossible. "Confirming Ghost?" the controller asked in amazement. "Confirmed. Ghost is providing assistance to Delta 2459. Word spread instantly through air traffic control centers across the country. Ghost, the most feared and respected fighter pilot in the Navy, was aboard a commercial airplane that was fighting for its life. Within minutes, every military base in the region was offering assistance. But Elena wasn't thinking about her legendary reputation. She was focused on saving 234 lives using every skill she had learned in 15 years of flying the most dangerous missions in the world. Using techniques that Wilson had never seen before, Elena began teaching him how to fly the damaged airplane through the storm. She showed him how to use engine power to compensate for damaged control surfaces, how to read wind patterns in ways that weren't taught in commercial training, and how to find the safest path through dangerous weather. "The ice buildup is changing how the airplane flies," Elena explained. But we can compensate by adjusting our approach to power and control inputs. She guided Wilson through maneuvers that she had learned flying Navy fighters, techniques for maintaining control when normal procedures weren't working. Slowly, Wilson began to feel the airplane responding better to his commands. "How do you know all this?" Wilson asked as they fought through another section of turbulence. "Because I've flown through worse weather in smaller airplanes," Elena replied. "Navy fighters have to operate in conditions that would ground commercial aircraft." Elena's military training also helped her coordinate with air traffic control in ways that Wilson couldn't. She knew how to communicate with military controllers, how to request priority handling, and how to get resources that normal commercial flights couldn't access. "Miami Center, Ghost," Elena transmitted. "Requesting military escort and weather assistance for Delta 2459. Ghost, we have F-18 fighters scrambling from Homestead Air Force Base. They'll provide weather reconnaissance and escort for your approach." Wilson stared at Elena in amazement. "You can call in military fighters?" "When you're Ghost, people listen," Elena replied simply. As Flight 2459 approached Miami, Elena faced the most challenging part of the emergency: landing a damaged airplane in dangerous weather. The storm had followed them south, and Miami International Airport was experiencing high winds, heavy rain, and dangerous wind shear. "Delta 2459 Miami Tower," came the radio call. "Current conditions are winds 090 at 35 gusting to 50, visibility 1 mile and heavy rain. Runway 09 right is available, but conditions are at minimums." "That's right at the edge of what this airplane can handle," Wilson said nervously. "Then we'll make it handle more than it's supposed to," Elena replied with the confidence of someone who had landed on aircraft carriers in similar conditions. Elena guided Wilson through an approach technique that combined commercial aviation procedures with military precision flying. She showed him how to read wind patterns by watching the movement of rain against the windscreen, how to use small control inputs to maintain stability in gusty conditions, and how to judge the exact moment to touch down on a wet runway. "Remember," Elena told Wilson as they descended through the clouds, "we're not just flying an airplane, we're bringing 234 people home to their families." The approach was one of the most difficult Wilson had ever attempted, but with Elena's guidance he managed to keep the airplane stable and on course. When they broke through the clouds and saw the runway ahead, it looked impossibly short and narrow. "You've got this," Elena said calmly. "Trust your training and trust the airplane." Flight 2459 touched down on Miami's runway with a harder impact than normal, but Wilson managed to keep the airplane straight and under control. As they rolled to a stop, emergency vehicles surrounded them, ready to help Captain Stevens and any injured passengers. "Delta 2459, outstanding job," Miami Tower transmitted. "Emergency equipment is standing by." In the passenger cabin, 234 people applauded the landing, most of them unaware that they had been saved by a woman who wasn't supposed to exist. As passengers evacuated Flight 2459, Elena tried to slip away quietly in the confusion. Her plan was to disappear back into hiding before anyone could ask too many questions. But her plan fell apart when a passenger started talking to reporters. "There was this woman in the back of the plane," Jake, the nervous teenager, told a TV news crew. "She looked like she was poor or something, but then she went to the cockpit and saved us all." The air traffic control people called her Ghost. Within hours, news of Elena's identity was spreading around the world. "Ghost saves commercial flight," read the headlines. "Legendary Navy pilot emerges from hiding to rescue 234 passengers." Elena's carefully maintained cover was completely destroyed. Enemy agents now knew exactly where she was, and the mission she had been hiding for was compromised. But as she watched Captain Stevens being loaded into an ambulance, alive because she had helped land the airplane in time, Elena realized she had made the right choice. "Commander Martinez," said FBI agent Sarah Williams, approaching Elena in the airport terminal. "We need to talk." "I know," Elena replied. "My cover is blown. The mission is compromised." "Actually," Agent Williams said, "the mission is over. We caught the enemy agents 3 days ago. You were going to be recalled from hiding next week anyway." Elena stared at the agent in shock. "You mean I didn't have to stay hidden anymore?" "That's right. You're free to return to active duty. And after what you did today, I think the Navy is going to want to give you a medal instead of a reprimand." 2 weeks after Flight 2459's emergency landing, Elena found herself standing in the Pentagon receiving the Navy Cross for her actions during the flight. The ceremony was attended by everyone whose life she had saved, including Captain Stevens, who had made a full recovery from his heart attack. "Commander Martinez," said Admiral Patricia Hayes during the ceremony. Your decision to reveal your identity and help save Flight 2459 represents the best traditions of naval service. You put the lives of innocent civilians above your own safety and mission requirements. First Officer Wilson, who had been promoted to captain after his performance during the emergency, spoke at the ceremony about Elena's actions. Commander Martinez didn't just help me land that airplane, Wilson told the assembled crowd. She taught me things about flying that I never learned in commercial training. She showed me that being a pilot means being ready to help others, no matter what the personal cost. The passengers from Flight 2459 also attended the ceremony. Little Lucy Chin, the 6-year-old girl whose crying had convinced Elena to reveal herself, presented Elena with a drawing she had made of the airplane landing safely. "Thank you for saving my airplane," Lucy said as she handed Elena the drawing. "Thank you for reminding me what's really important," Elena replied, kneeling down to Lucy's level. After the ceremony, Elena was offered a choice that would determine the rest of her career. She could return to her old job flying fighters and leading squadrons, or she could accept a new assignment that would use her unique experience in a different way. "Commander," Admiral Hayes explained, "we want you to develop a new program that would place military pilots on commercial flights as undercover air marshals. Your experience with Flight 2459 showed us that military pilots can provide capabilities that normal air marshals can't." The program would be called Operation Guardian Angel. Military pilots would travel on commercial flights posing as ordinary passengers, but they would be ready to assist during emergencies that required advanced flying skills. "It's a new concept," Admiral Hayes admitted, "but your actions proved that it could save lives." Elena accepted the assignment immediately. "When do I start?" "Right now. We already have 20 volunteers from the Navy, Air Force, and Marines. They're waiting for you to train them." 6 months later, Elena was running the Guardian Angel training program at a classified facility in Nevada. Her students were experienced military pilots who were learning how to hide in plain sight while being ready to emerge when needed. "The key to being invisible," Elena told her first class of Guardian Angel pilots, "is to become someone people don't want to notice. Poor clothes, tired appearance, cheap luggage. People avoid looking at passengers who remind them of their own fears about money or failure." She taught them how to assess aircraft emergencies from passenger seats, how to communicate with air traffic control using military protocols, and how to coordinate with commercial crews who had never worked with military personnel. "Remember," Elena emphasized, "you're not there to take over the airplane. You're there to help the commercial pilots do their job better. Teach them what they need to know, but let them stay in command." The Guardian Angel pilots practiced on real commercial flights, traveling as passengers while being ready to assist if emergencies developed. They prevented 3 major accidents in their first year of operation, using techniques that Elena had developed during her experience on Flight 2459. As the Guardian Angel program expanded, Elena's story became legendary in both military and civilian aviation. The woman who had hidden in the back row of an airplane and then emerged to save 234 lives became a symbol of the hidden heroes who protect people every day. "Commander Martinez represents the best of American military service," said President Jennifer Walsh during a White House ceremony honoring the Guardian Angel program. "She reminds us that heroes often hide among us, waiting for the moment when they're needed most." Elena's techniques for emergency flying were adopted by airlines around the world. Commercial pilots trained on methods that had been developed for military combat flying, and the line between military and civilian aviation safety became permanently blurred. "Ghost changed how we think about aviation emergencies," said International Air Transport Association Director Michael Chen. "She proved that military and civilian aviation can work together to save lives." But Elena remained modest about her role in the changes. "I just did what any pilot would do," she told reporters. "When people need help in the air, you help them. It doesn't matter if you're military or civilian." 3 years after Flight 2459's emergency landing, Elena was promoted to captain and given command of the Guardian Angel program for the entire military. Her pilots now flew on commercial aircraft around the world, invisible guardians ready to help when disasters struck. "Captain Martinez," said Admiral Robert Taylor during Elena's promotion ceremony, "your program has saved over 500 lives in its first 3 years of operation. You've created something that will protect civilian aviation for generations to come." The ceremony was held aboard the USS Enterprise, an aircraft carrier where Elena had served early in her career. As she stood on the deck where she had first learned to land fighters, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her from a hidden passenger in seat 47F to the commander of a program that protected travelers around the world. Captain Stevens, the pilot whose heart attack had started it all, attended the ceremony as Elena's guest. "If you hadn't been on that flight," he told Elena, "234 people would have died, including me. Your decision to help changed everything." "Sometimes hiding means being in the right place to help when people need it most," Elena replied. 5 years after Elena created the Guardian Angel program, similar programs had been adopted by military forces around the world. British, French, German, and Japanese pilots now flew on commercial aircraft as hidden guardians, all using techniques that Elena had developed. "Captain Martinez created a new model for aviation security," said NATO Secretary General Antonio Rodriguez. "Her approach recognizes that the best protection comes from having trained personnel already in place when emergencies occur." The Guardian Angels had prevented dozens of accidents and saved thousands of lives. But more importantly, they had changed how people thought about safety and protection. Heroes didn't always wear uniforms or carry badges. Sometimes they sat in cheap seats wearing old clothes, waiting for the moment when ordinary people needed extraordinary help. Elena continued to fly occasionally as a Guardian Angel herself, maintaining her skills and staying connected to the program she had created. She still traveled in disguise, still made herself invisible, but now her hiding served a purpose that everyone could understand. "The best Guardian Angels are the ones you never notice," Elena told new recruits. "If you do your job right, passengers will land safely and never know you were there." Today, Captain Elena "Ghost" Martinez commands the largest aviation safety program in the world. Guardian Angel pilots fly on thousands of commercial flights every day, invisible protectors ready to emerge when needed. She still flies occasionally herself, though now she's too well known to completely disappear. Aviation personnel around the world recognize the name Ghost, and her call sign represents the highest levels of skill and dedication in military aviation. But Elena's favorite flights are still the ones where she sits in the back row, wearing old clothes and reading cheap paperback novels. Those flights remind her of why she started hiding in the first place, and why she chose to emerge when 234 people needed help. In airports around the world, passengers board aircraft without knowing that their safety might depend on the tired-looking person in the cheap seat, the one everyone ignores because they look poor or ordinary. These hidden guardians carry skills and experience that can save lives, but only if they're willing to reveal themselves when the moment comes. Elena "Ghost" Martinez was supposed to stay hidden forever. But sometimes the most important thing a hidden hero can do is stop hiding and start helping, even when it costs them everything they've worked to protect. She learned that on Flight 2459, 11 kilometers above the ground, when a little girl's tears reminded her that some things are more important than staying secret. And every Guardian Angel who trains in her program learns the same lesson. Heroes hide not to avoid responsibility, but to be ready when people need them most. The woman in seat 47F was nobody special. But Ghost was legendary. And when 234 people needed a legend, Elena Martinez chose to stop hiding and start saving lives. This story explores themes of hidden identity, sacrifice, and the courage required to reveal yourself when others need help, showing how the greatest heroes often hide among us until the moment they're needed most.